Okay, so again, activity-based costing is costing system that provide information about the costs that's going to help the manager to identify potential effect on capacity, how the capacity affect the variable and fixed cost. Supplemental system. So it's not like a main system of the company. It's going to be supplemental system, and it's going to support the traditional costing system. So what that means is that will be extra cost for the company. Now, why we want to do activity-based costing? For different reasons. Because it's different than traditional costing system in terms of four main categories. First one is that activity-based costing, in traditional costing system, we're going to allocate only and only manufacturing cost. So we're going to split the manufacturing cost on the direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Where in the activity-based costing, we're going to take a look at the manufacturing cost, which is the direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Plus, we're going to see, is there anything from the non-manufacturing cost that we can also allocate to our product? So that's a different thing than the normal traditional system, when we're saying the product cost is only direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. When activity-based costing, now we're saying, okay, those three, yes, but let's see what else from the non-manufacturing cost we can also allocate to the product. Second thing is that this activity-based costing doesn't allocate all of the manufacturing cost. Where in the traditional system, we're going to allocate all of the manufacturing cost. Not used by the product, we're just allocating direct material, direct labor, manufacturing overhead. Is it related to the product? Is it overhead? Yes, it is. We have to allocate. But is the product actually using it? I don't care. It's there. Where the activity-based costing, we're going to check, is this cost related to our product? Even if it's manufacturing cost, is it related to our product? If it's not, we're not going to allocate it. So for that reason, most likely we're going to allocate most of the manufacturing cost. Not all of it, but most of them. And we're going to allocate some of the non-manufacturing costs as well. Next one is that how many cost pools we're using. Usually in the company, on the traditional system, we're using for the allocation of the manufacturing overhead, we're using the manufacturing overhead rate, which manufacturing overhead rate is calculated before the starting of the period by using the total cost for the upcoming period divided by the total usage of allocation base, which is chosen to allocate the manufacturing overhead. And then we can have plant-wide manufacturing overhead rate, which will be not very sophisticated, but good enough to allocate cost of the entire company into our product. Now, the next level will be more complex, will be departmental overhead, which now we're going to calculate the cost only and only for the department, which using the cost and we are allocating the cost. And the most sophisticated with more complex and more cost pools will be activity-based costing. In activity-based costing, we're going to have many cost pools, and we're going to, for that reason, that will be more sophisticated and more accurate way to allocate the manufacturing overhead cost. So how that's difference? Each activity-based costing, each cost pool will be very unique. It's going to have his unique measures. The measure is not going to be the same. Where in the traditional costing system, we're using only one measure. Usually is the volume measure, which is either it's going to be direct labor, either it's going to be cost of the direct labor, is it going to be machine hours, but it's going to be only one measure. When the activity-based costing, we can have different measures. What kind of measure we can use is that we can use the now the next thing before we go to the measures, let's see how we calculating the predetermined overhead. Now the predetermined overhead in traditional costing is based on the budget activity. So we have before the start of the period, we come up with the total cost, which is budgeted for the upcoming period. We come up with the level of activity, which is also budgeted for the allocation base for the entire period. And then we're going to start applying the overhead cost. Use, unused, we just apply it. So we're going to include everything, unused, idle capacity, everything. When activity-based costing, now we're going to charge to the product only and only the costs that they actually using. We're not going to allocate the idle capacity. We're not going to allocate the cost just because we have to allocate the cost. All those other costs which are not related to our product, we're going to treat them as a period cost. How are we going to organize the activity-based costing? As you're going to see in the case, first thing that they're going to come up with the activities. What kind of activity we have. Then we combine those activity into the cost pool. Then we're going to come up with the cost per level of activity. Once we do that, now for the level of activity, in order to measure those levels of activity, we're going to use the different drivers. And you're going to see in the case that we are actually using different drivers. One driver will be based on the duration, which is the time that passing from the we need to perform certain activity. The other one will be purely transaction driver, which will be based on the number of activities that we're using for a certain activity without considering the time. Now, how the cost will be treated under the activity-based costing. So now in the activity-based costing, we're going to have 5 levels of activity on the larger scale. Where in the traditional, again, we're going to use only one. Volume measures, that's it. Now, what will be those levels of activity? We can go with the units level. We can go with the batch level. We can go with the product. We can go with the customer. We can go on organization sustaining level. So you can see how many different levels we have in activity-based costing. Now, in order to understand this, we have to understand that the traditional absorption costing system, if we're using the traditional absorption costing, which absorb the fixed manufacturing overhead into the product cost, the predetermined overhead rate are calculated by using the measure of the budget activities. Where in the activity-based costing, products will be charged only and only for the capacity that they use. Again, cost of the idle capacity, it's not going to be charged to the product, which makes the result or the cost for the product more stable and consistent with the objective to assigning to the object or to the product only the cost which the product actually using. Again, design of the activity-based costing. First, we're going to go with the cost objects. We're going to see the 2 cost objects in the case when we start working the case after the midterm. Then we're going to see the activities which the people in the company come up with the different activities. Then we're going to see how they what kind of resources they're consuming. Is it going to be time? What kind of drivers we're going to use? Is it going to be duration driver or transaction driver? We're going to calculate the cost. And we're going to start doing the reports. Again, step of the implementing that activity base, identify defined activities, get the activity cost pools and activity measures. Then we're going to assign the overhead cost to the activity cost pool. We're going to calculate the activity rates. And then we're going to assign the overhead cost to the object using that activity rate. And then we're going to prepare the management report. The management report basically will be the one that we're chasing here. What we're chasing is what will be the product cost based on only and only of the actual usage of the capacity that product using. And then you're going to see that's going to change the entire picture of the report. By understanding this, we have to set some standards. Now, for the standards, in order to set the standards, standard will be for measuring the activity that's happened in the cost pool, and the standards will be about the duration of the time that takes certain activity to take place, or duration, the number of the transactions that happen in that. So for that reason, we're going to have two types of standards. One standard will be ideal standard, which can only and only be obtained in the best circumstances. That means it's required employee to work 100% on the 100% efficiency for the entire working time. The question is, how realistic is that? How realistic is we to have employee which working on the 100% peak efficiency during the duration of the entire working day? Any of you who's working? Are you guys working? What's your working hours? 8 hours, 7 hours? 8 hours, 7 hours? So out of 7 hours, let's go with the 7 hours. Out of 7 hours, how many hours you working on the 100% peak efficiency? Question for you. That's the normal half of the time. Okay, that's a fair comment. That means that I appreciate your honesty. That's usually what's happened every time when they ask students. Usually the answer I'm getting 4, 5 hours. Yeah, that's normal. So thank you for these responses. Now, question for you. If you're the one who paying the employee, and you're paying the employee $40 per hour, $40 per hour, and if an employee working 8 hours per day, how many hours do you expect employee to work on the 100%? Why? My question is, why? Why you have a double standards now? That is true. But they also, aren't you making money for yourself when you're working for your employer now? You pay for that. So what you're saying is when you pay, you want full efficiency from your employees, but if you get paid, no thank you, sir. Is that what you're telling me? Okay, that's a fair comment as well. Okay, so you see how unfair everything is. Keep that in mind one day when you become owner of the company. But what you can do is instead of expecting ideal standards, you can go with the practical standards. Practical standard will be the tight standard, but attainable standard, which means that's going to include reasonable but highly efficient effort by the average employee. Now, what you can see here, the key point here is the word average. Now, the question is, what is average employee? What is average employee today? And what will be the average employee tomorrow? You have to understand that that word average changes with pretty much with every generation. Average employee which you are today is not going to be the average employee which is going to grow tomorrow from the generation Z or the next generation after those. Why? Because every generation have more and more and more expectations, more demands. They want more things and they expect to work less. So that will be very interesting to see what will be the practical standards and how those practical standards gonna evolve during the time and during the generations. So, but keep in mind that we have two types of standards. One is ideal standards, which pretty much we're never going to use, and we have the practical standard. One thing we have to remind ourselves is how we come up with the predetermined overhead rate, because that will be the crucial point here. How we come up with this predetermined overhead rate. Predetermined overhead rate is based on the estimation, which is activity of the allocation base, which we're using as a denominator, and total cost for the upcoming period that we're using as a numerator. Now, the denominator activity, level of activity, usually it's going to be for the budget purposes. Now, it will be our choice which one we're going to use. Imagine this, if you have an employee, one employee, you're running coffee shop, one employee. And you know that that employee, if you hire the employee for 7.5 hours per day, for the entire year, if the employee working on the 100% efficiency, you have the employee can give you 1,950 hours. Since we already know that's impossible, the question is, what will be the normal hours that you will be required from the employee to work? Having in mind that in Canada, now we have how many stat holidays? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 stat holidays. 11 stat holidays. And if an employee has a 10 days vacation, that means 22 days 21, 22 days, that employee is gone. Or that we're talking about business days. That 21, 22, 22 business days, that's a business days per month. The months with the usually months have 21 to 22 business days. So for 1 month, that employee is gone. Not because we're closed, because there's a start holidays and because minimum, let's say the first year is just new employee. The first year you owe the employee 10 days. So if you have the employee for 1,950 hours, so you have to deduct those 21 days, 7.5 hours. So basically, as a denominator activity for your predetermined overhead, you're not going to use the ideal capacity. You're going to go with some practical capacity. Also, you're going to use the hours for the lunch breaks, for the washroom breaks, for the telephone browsing, for the internet activities, and anything like that the employee can do. So now the denominator activity is the active activity which is figured to compute the predetermined overhead. So that for that reason, once you're estimating the activity level, which is denominator level of activity, that predetermined overhead now you're not going to be changed for the rest of the year, for the entire year. Now on the predetermined overhead rate, now you're going to have two things. You're going to have the variable component and you're going to have the fixed component. Now the variable component for the variances, we're going to use the variable analysis, but for the fixed overhead, we're still going to use the fixed overhead analysis. But on the fixed overhead will be the key for analyzing and understanding what's the main difference between the traditional system and activity-based costing. Before we go that, under the traditional costing system, we have two systems. One is normal system, which normal system applying the overhead by using the actual level of activity. And we have the standard cost system, which is the standard cost system. We're applying the overhead by applying the predetermined overhead rate, time, standard hours that we need to achieve the actual production. And that's create the problem and difference between. Again, applying the overhead is not a problem. Applying the overhead under those two systems is the difference. In one, we're applying the overhead time the predetermined overhead rate, whereas the other one, we're applying using the standard hours or standard level that is required to the actual level of activity what we achieve time the predetermined overhead. And that creates that fixed overhead variance. Now, the fixed overhead variance, you already know from Shirley and from me probably on the very first course if you take it. Now, the budget variance will be the comparison simply actual versus the budget. But the volume variance will be the one that's going to show us how well we utilizing the fixed cost. And that's going to make the difference. Now, in that case, what we have to understand is we have the capacity. Means I have my employee, which is in the coffee shop, that can give me 1,950 hours. But those are my standards on the high level efficiencies. The question is, what will be my budgeted hour that I'm gonna use based on the actual usage of my employee in order to come up with the predetermined overhead rate. So you can see based on my standards, I'm supposed to use 1,950 hours. But when I'm doing my budget, I'm not going to use 1,950 hours because that employee never going to reach that amount of hours. Yes, I'm going to pay him for 1,950 hours, but there will be start holidays, there will be a vacation time, there will be some other things. So we have to be realistic. So most likely, if I use only one employee, my hours will be, let me briefly do that calculation. We're going to have 22 days times 7.5. That's 22 days times 7.5. That will be 165. And another, let's say 50 minus 200 hours. The level that I'm going to use for my denominator will be 9,750 hours. So I'm now 200 hours below the standard that I have, the capacity that I have to use my employee. And that's going to create that volume variance right there. So the volume variance, later on, we're going to see that the volume variance is going to give you the opportunity, if you want to utilize that difference, how much you can get extra. That's what we're going to see in this case. In this case, we're going to chase how much we're paying these employees, for how many hours we're paying them, how many hours they're actually working, and why the company is losing money. It will be very interesting finding. I hope you find it interesting. I personally find it very, very interesting myself. So on the case methodology, if you have to go to the case methodology back, first what we're going to do, we're going to identify the problem. The problem with this company will be very simple. The company is losing money. Then we have to do analysis. Then we have to do impact analysis. So for the impact analysis, when somebody says impact analysis, usually you're going, if I do this, what's going to happen? If I do that, what's going to happen? And those things. And one of the impact analysis that is considered is status quo. That means you're not doing anything. Well, if you're not doing anything, there's no analysis. So for me, on the impact analysis, by doing status quo, there is not kind of option, but I know you're using it, so that's okay. Then we're going to have to find the criteria for the effective solution. We have to evaluate the alternatives and recommend the action. So again, for the problem identification, we can go either this company not using effectively the costing system, or those have effective costing system, or using the traditional costing system, or company is unprofitable, or company losing money. We're going to see in the case, and you're going to understand from the case what exactly happening there. On the methodology, we have to gather some evidence of the problem. Summarize the key facts, interpret the facts, and focus on the symptoms. So now on the analysis, I'm not going to ask you that case methodology is going to change to analysis. For us, the analysis will be the situational analysis. I want you to do situational analysis. Again, when you're doing the situational analysis, why we need to do situational analysis? Because you have to evaluate the current situation. Everything that you have to do in your life one day, every time when there's a problem, first thing that you have to do is to see what you have currently in your hands. What is the current situation before you go any further, before you even start consider any options? You want to see what I have available. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are threats? You can interpret it this way. Imagine you are a new employee which is just hired in the company, what you're going to do? Assess the current situation. Find the company background, check the company mission and vision, find what the company wants, uh, assess the company, which are the strength, which are the weaknesses, which is the opportunity, which are the threats in the current company, check the financial statements, see, do some quantitative analysis, come up with the conclusion. Imagine this. You are new coach of some, I don't know, hockey team or basketball team or soccer team. They just hire you. What you gonna do first? You're gonna assess the current situation. You're gonna see uh, some background about the that sports team. You're gonna start chasing what's the objective of the owners of the company, what they want, what's the mission is vision of this company or this soccer club, what they want, what's the how they see the club going. Are they gonna build a new team, or are you gonna deal with just try to chase a fast championship or fast results, regardless the cost? Then you're gonna assess the strength, weakness, opportunity, threats. Then you're gonna check the current financial information to see what's the resources that you have available. And then you want to make a conclusion. And based on that, when you assess the current situation, then you're going to start next step. So always look around, make yourself comfortable with the analyzing the situation, and then see what you can do about it. That's what would be your analysis here. Research key will be the industry, statistic trends, anything like that. What you can do is you can do some research if you want. If you don't want to do research, totally fine. You have enough information. Now, on the activity-based costing, next thing that I want you to do is once you assess the current situation, then you're going to see this time-driven activity-based costing, which is discussed in this case. Next thing is find out what the time-driven activity-based costing is. Suggested will be introduction, problem statement will be the company losing money. Requirements will be obviously to solve the problem. And then you're going to introduce this time-driven activity-based costing. So technically, before you go any further, I have suggestion for you. Why don't you use time-driven activity-based costing system? Next question is, what is this system? Then you're coming in hand and start explaining what is it. How does the problem affect the organization stakeholders? So basically, if the company is losing money, how does it affect the organization and stakeholders? Well, obviously, they're not happy. Obviously, they're going to start looking for some improvements to find out from where they're losing money, why they're losing money, and how can they stop losing money and start becoming profitable. Time-driven activity-based costing, we're going to find it. If you're using Hongren as a reference, you can go to those pages. Now, the Berenstain Island, you probably won't be able to find it. On the notes, everything you're going to have it in the appendixes. The appendixes will be clearly communicated with you. We're going to find out what kind of cost this company has. And we're going to see the results. Now, the interesting thing that you're going to see about this case is everything is in euro. We're not going to, for simplicity, I don't want you to stay in euro. So you can clearly, easily move to the Canadian dollars or just dollar amount. It doesn't even specify Canadian dollars. But don't stay with euro, because if you stay with euro, then logical thing you're going to ask me, do I have to do the currency conversion? No, you don't. That's not objective of the course. Where you can find the case you can find it in the case material. which is in your backpack. So that's the second case that you have in your backpack. And that's about a little bit information about the case and that activity-based costing.